Colleagues and friends, good morning. Thank you for your patience this morning. We really appreciate it. Auntie Joy Murphy-Wandin, Chancellor of the University of Melbourne, Elizabeth Alexander, Prime Minister Tony Abbott, Premier Denis Napthine, Victorian Minister for Health David Davies, Victorian Shadow Minister for Health Gavin Jennings, such a distinguished audience, and of course the eponymous Peter Doherty and the Doherty family. My name's Glenn Davis. It's a delight to welcome you this morning to the official opening of the Peter Doherty Institute for Infection and Immunology. You'll hear a lot of names and a lot of exciting detail as we go through the opening this morning, but I do want to start by acknowledging a world-renowned immunologist and science leader, Professor Jim Mcklusky. It is his vision that brings us here together. It was his determination to create a world-class immunology institute in Melbourne that has made today possible, and I'm delighted that he, his wife and family are with us this morning. To begin proceedings, it is a delight to call on Auntie Joy Wandin-Murphy to welcome us to country on behalf of the Wurundjeri people and the Kulin Nations.
Thanks very much, Glenn. Could I begin by saying that the Doherty Institute has been built on the traditional lands of my father and my ancestors. And it's a great privilege to be with each and every one of you today. And I pay my respects to them, and I pay my respects to all elders and ancestors of this great continent and neighbouring communities. I'd also like to very much acknowledge one of our fabulous workers at our Anenda Kuri Health Unit that's been here today and accompanied me, and that's one and only Sharon Lewin. Who now works in leadership, and might I just say that our Anemda unit is well renowned now for its public and population population issues. Could I also acknowledge our Prime Minister, our Chancellor, and each and every one of our distinguished guests, and of course, ladies and gentlemen. When we talk about scientific research, for my knowledge, and I don't think it's changed, we've been the most researched people in the world. I sometimes shudder at the thought of being a relic, but then I relate it to the fact that we are a part of the oldest living culture in the world, down here on Wurundjeri country, and very proud to be. And then if we look at the flora and fauna legislation, that too brings me back to why we're here and why we've survived for so long. Because we are and we belong to this wonderful environment that each and every one of us share today. So it's not for me to say that scientific research should not continue. In fact, it should. But there are so many issues for our community and other communities that are now needed to be addressed. And could I, at this moment, very much thank the wonderful Mr. Peter Doherty and to each and every one of you that's been involved, including the Chairman of Melbourne Health, our wonderful Lord Mayor, Robert Doyle, because a lot of people tend to think that we now just live in the top and the centre of this great continent. And indeed, for our Wurundjeri community who do live in southeast Australia, there are only around 1,500 of us now. And I actually am the senior elder at this time. So on behalf of all elders across this great country and neighbouring island, can I say that we want to see better health, better conditions all round for our population, and we certainly welcome involvement with, and however it happens, with the Peter Doherty Institute. We're known for our seasons, and we, the Wurundjeri, have 7 seasons. And this season at the moment is known as the wombat season. And you might wonder why on earth I want to talk about wombats, but it's not only about wombats. It's to tell you that seasonal weather is about seasonal change. And of course, if we look at change, then we have to look at the reasons why there are changes. And I think if we look at scientific research, and hopefully we'll be able to combine the wonderful methods that kept our people alive for 60,000 years and more. Each of our Aboriginal and Islander communities have their own way of welcoming people to country. And indeed, these very eucalypt leaves were such a wonderful medical resource for our people, and in fact it's quite well known today to get hold of a jar of eucalypt rub or something like that in the chemist and rub it on your arm or heal a sore or whatever the case may be. But for us, we're known as the Managum people, and from the tradition of thousands and thousands of years old, it's about sharing with you from these very branches that come from a place where I'm very fortunate to live, where thousands of years ago my family lived there, and as a great-grandmother still live in that area today. We share these leaves with you by offering you a leaf. We hope that you accept it. Accepting this leaf means that you are welcome to everything, from the tops of the trees to the roots of the earth. It also means that you join with me to not only celebrate the life of our communities, but indeed pay your respects and honour them for the way in which they've nurtured this wonderful country, and that we should do the same so that many generations that follow will be able to enjoy what we've all been given. I personally want to say thank you for the wonderful invitation to be here. The connection that I've had with University of Melbourne has been amazing, and I know we can only grow from here on in. So my language is the Woy Wurrung, Wominjaka, Wurundjeri Balak, Yemen, Kundibik, and you are most welcome to the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. I'm delighted you put the leaves down there. I thought I was going to commit some terrible cultural faux pas by removing them from the lectern, but you've done it for me, so I feel perfectly comfortable. The wonderful Auntie Joy Murphy, and I also want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet today, the members of the Great Kulin Nation, and pay my deep personal respects to their elders past and present. And I want to thank their elders, particularly senior elders like Auntie Joy of the Wurundjeri, for the work that they do throughout our community as we meet here today. Auntie Joy made mention of it, but at the City of Melbourne, we always acknowledge our First Peoples. We're very conscious that we're a very young city, founded in 1835, 179 years ago. So we're a very young city, but our First Peoples are the oldest continuous culture in the world, and we should be very proud of that. So thank you for your role this morning, Joy. I promise you the longest part of this speech is the acknowledgements. Unfortunately, they are lengthy, but here we go. First of all, our Prime Minister, Tony Abbott. It's wonderful to have you here, Tony. Our Premier, Denis Napthine, the Victorian Minister for Health, the Honourable David Davis, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition and Shadow Minister for Health, the Honourable Gavin Jennings, wonderful Peter Doherty, Nobel Laureate, Professor Peter Doherty, AC. Could I also acknowledge the Chancellor, Elizabeth Alexander, the Vice-Chancellor, Glyn Davis, Sharon Lewin, our remarkable Director of the Doherty Institute. I also want to particularly mention, and Glyn did before, two people who I think have been real drivers of our opening today, Pradeep Phillip and Jim Mcklusky, and thank you for your constancy of vision and application. I don't think without you it would have happened. Could I also thank, if I may, this might not be exactly de rigueur, but I'm going to do it, past federal and state governments. Because that was the genesis of the Doherty. And I think it's right that we acknowledge that this has been a continuous and bipartisan view for this wonderful institute to come into existence. So many distinguished members of the health and medical research community who are here. And also, can I thank those of you who are here representing our philanthropic and benevolent associations. There are many people here who, through their financial support clinical research, and pure research and the endeavours of doctors and scientists across this precinct and indeed Melbourne, Victoria and Australia. That was going to be the end of my acknowledgements, but I've got to make one more, and that is to the remarkable Sir Gustav Nossel. Always a pleasure to have you back here. Such a titan in this precinct, and I could acknowledge each of you line by line, but I'm going to stop there, okay? Just two brief things. Gwyn, first of all, thank you so much to the university for your collaboration. It has been a remarkable collaboration. I can tell you there is great pride at the Royal Melbourne Hospital in being a partner in the Doherty Institute. It's a partnership that spanned a very long time in our city's history. And I can tell you, after 166 years, our motto at the Royal Melbourne still rings true. I learn to help the suffering. And that's an important part of our mission. Thank you all for attending today's ceremony. I'll be your MC, and I promise you that's about the longest speech I make by a long way. I'm just going to introduce our others and then gather them at the end for the photography and for unveiling of the plaque. First, would you welcome our Premier, the Honourable Dennis Napthine.
Thank you very much, Robert. Could I also acknowledge the traditional owners of this land and pay my respects to elders past and present, and particularly thank Auntie Joy for her wonderful welcome to country here today. Could I acknowledge the Prime Minister Tony Abbott, Minister for Health David Davis, the Shadow Minister for Health Gavin Jennings, Robert Doyle in his two roles as Lord Mayor of Melbourne, but today in his particular role as Chair of Melbourne Health, Elizabeth Alexander, the Chancellor of University of Melbourne, Professor Glyn Davis, the Vice-Chancellor, and Laureate Professor Peter Doherty, the patron of this institute and the Doherty family. It's wonderful to have Peter here. He's an inspiration to researchers around the world, and to have this institute named in his honour, I think will inspire researchers each and every day. Professor Jim Mcklusky and his family, who's been a driving force of this institute. Professor Sharon Lewin, Director of the Peter Doherty Institute of Infection and Immunity. And Sharon Lewin is an absolutely terrific appointment to this position. She is an outstanding leader, and we've seen just recently with her leadership at the AIDS 2014 conference that she is internationally recognised, recognised for her science, her research, but her ability to communicate and lead. And as an appointment, I can't think of a better appointment, and I'm sure she'll do an outstanding job. It's an absolute honour and privilege for me to be here today to be a part of the opening of the Peter Doherty Institute for Infection and Immunity. This institute will no doubt be a world leader. It already is a world leader in the research of human infectious diseases and immunity. It's the first such institute in the Southern Hemisphere, and it is an enormous collaborative venture between the University of Melbourne and Melbourne Health and many, many other partners. And this sort of collaboration is the future direction of leading research. There is no doubt, as we increase the complexity of the research that we need to do, bringing parties together, bringing groups together in a collaborative way is the framework to deliver the very best outcomes. The Peter Doherty Institute in Victoria is the 14th specialist research institute here in Melbourne and Victoria. And we are very proud as a Victorian government that we have already committed $55 million over the next 21 years to augment the funding from Melbourne Health and the University of Melbourne and many other philanthropic organisations to make sure this institute has the resources it needs to do the work that it will do in the benefit of mankind. Also, the Peter Doherty Institute will have access to the ongoing funding that the Victorian Government provides each and every year for medical research. In addition, we know that Melbourne and Victoria, to use a colloquial term, punch well above their weight in terms of access to NH and MRC grants. We're currently receiving 42% of the grants from the NH and MRC, and that's because we have the track record of success. We do have the medical and scientific research institutes. We have the expertise in our scientific community, and we certainly deliver outstanding results. And there's no doubt that the Peter Doherty Institute is a truly collaborative venture and brings together a whole range of organisations. And excuse me while I list those organisations, because each of those organisations is really bringing something significant to the Institute and making the Institute better and stronger. It unites the University of Melbourne Department of Microbiology and Immunology, which has a long history of great champion research and success. The Microbiological Diagnostic Unit of Public Health Laboratory, the Victorian Nosocomial Infection Surveillance System, the Victorian Infectious Diseases Reference Laboratory, the Victorian Infectious Diseases Service, and I think one of the crowning glories is to have this institute recognised as the World Health Organisation Collaborating Centre for Reference and Research on Influenza. And to have that as one of the situations here at the Institute, I think is enormous credit to the Institute. The Peter Doherty Institute will build on the proud Victorian record of medical and scientific research. And it is absolutely outstanding that we have Dr. Peter Doherty here with us today. Peter Doherty and I share a similar background. Peter Doherty started life as a veterinarian, and I am also a veterinarian. I'm also excited by all the work that is done in these institutes because, as well as being a veterinarian, I did postgraduate work in epidemiology and public health. And as an epidemiologist, we get excited by new diseases and how diseases spread and how we work with infectious diseases. Now, so I am very, very much personally interested in this work, and I pay great tribute to Peter Doherty for his enormous success and leadership. A Nobel Prize winner in 1997 for his outstanding work in immunology and infectious disease, an Australian of the Year in 1997, and he builds on the track record of Australians who have this outstanding achievements in science and medicine. And in Victoria, we are very, very proud of Sir Macfarlane Burnet, who was a Nobel Prize winner in 1960 for his work on immunology and immune tolerance. And of course, within our audience here today, Sir Gus Nossal, whose work on antibody formation and immunological tolerance is outstanding. And Sir Gus has been an absolute icon in medical research across the world, but particularly here in Victoria. So it's wonderful, Sir Gus, that you're here to give your imprimatur to this wonderful institute. The work of the Peter Doherty Institute is absolutely vital to Melbourne, Victoria, Australia and the world, particularly when we're dealing with a constant emerging diseases. And we've seen in the world today the issue with Ebola, and this institute will be the front line in dealing with Ebola here in Australia and also working across the world as we tackle this significant outbreak. And we've seen in recent years with SARS and many other infectious diseases where you need expertise, quick response and a very considered approach. And the Peter Doherty Institute will lead that here in Melbourne, Victoria. And of course, in the emerging issue with regard to all infectious diseases across the world is the issue of drug resistance. And as we have increasingly bacterial and viral diseases that are increasingly difficult to deal with traditional drug treatments, it provides great opportunities for research to be able to tackle those diseases. Again, I congratulate Professor Sharon Lewin for her appointment to this position. I congratulate all those involved in working here in Peter Doherty Institute. This is no doubt an absolutely fantastic day for Melbourne and Victoria, particularly for the University of Melbourne and Melbourne Health, but a great day for the world that we've got this institute of this quality here to help us deal with the issues of infectious diseases and immunology. I congratulate all the partners and I wish the Institute well for many, many years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Premier. I might mention I'm wearing three hats today. We might be at the Intellectual Centre of Melbourne, but later this day I'll be at the spiritual heart of Melbourne at the MCG as Geelong's #1 ticket holder. And while this is an important opening, no, I won't go there. I won't go there. This is Melbourne after all. In introducing our Prime Minister, there are many things I could say about Tony. But the thing that struck me is I want you to think back to his time as Health Minister in the federal government. I doubt that there would have been a Health Minister with a greater commitment to medical research than Tony Abbott. And I will remember after he had left office that there was a dinner at the Myer Mural Hall by the research community to thank Tony for his work during his time as Minister. Now, can I point out to you, that's actually quite unusual when you go into opposition to have a field say, we want to say thank you to you. So I was delighted about being there on that night. So it is particularly appropriate that Tony returns as our Prime Minister to help us open the Doherty Institute. Our Prime Minister, Tony Abbott.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Lord Mayor Robert Doyle. It is a real thrill to be here in Parkville, in the heart of the Medical Research Precinct, here in Melbourne, the capital of medical research here in Australia. Auntie Joy, Chancellor, Vice-Chancellor, Professor Doherty, Premier, Lord Mayor, parliamentary colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. We should celebrate the heroes of medical research, and we have quite a few heroes of medical research here in Australia. We have an extraordinary record of medical research achievement in this country, whether it's Peter Doherty, whether it's Howard Florey, Macfarlane Burnett, Ian Fraser, a long list of people who have changed our world because of their work in the field of health and medical research. Perhaps no Australian has changed the world in the same way that Howard Florey has. Untold millions of people who would otherwise be dead are alive because of the work of Florey and that pantheon of medical researchers from this country of ours. Australia is good at many things, but there is nothing where we excel more than in health and medical research. We are a medical research superpower, and long may that continue. Some 8 of our 15 Nobel laureates are in the field of medical research. With well under 1% of the world's population, we produce approaching 5% of the world's refereed medical research. And I wish to do my part as Prime Minister, following on the work I was able to do as Health Minister, to keep our country at the forefront of health and medical research. And while many would argue about how it might be funded, the establishment of the Medical Research Future Fund, which will build up to be one of the very largest such funds in the world, is an earnest of this government's absolute commitment to maintaining Australia's place in this field. And yes, it is happily one of those areas of bipartisan agreement. The Institute, whose magnificent building we opened today, is opened by this government, was funded by the last government from an education fund that was established by the government before that. So 3 governments, one way or another, have a hand in the work that we bring to fruition today, and I'm confident that all future governments of all political persuasions will continue to support it, because it is so important. We have the World Health Organization collaborating laboratory on influenza here at the Doherty Institute. We have our high security testing facilities here at the Doherty Institute. Should Ebola come to this country, this institute, this centre will be at the very forefront of our defences against this dreadful disease. I can advise that our country is prepared for any such eventuality, and for some weeks now we have been screening all visitors to this country, all people coming to this country from West Africa, because the last thing we want is complacency in the face of this latest natural scourge. But we are well placed to deal with these things because of the work of our medical researchers, because of the skill and professionalism of our health and medical community, and because of the commitment over the years of all levels of government, of all political persuasions. This is a marvellous occasion. It is on occasions such as this that we can feel most proud of our country, and it is fitting that on occasion such as this we salute Professor Peter Doherty, Nobel Laureate, Australian of the Year, living national treasure and inspirer of this marvellous facility, which I happily declare open.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Could I now introduce the Honourable David Davis, the Minister for Health.
Prime Minister, Premier, Lord Mayor, Peter Doherty, Elizabeth Alexander, Glyn Davis, Dr Gareth Goodyear, importantly Jim Mcklusky as the man with the vision, and Professor Sharon Lewin. And I do want to reinforce the Premier's comments about Sharon Lewin's remarkable contribution to AIDS 2014 and now as the director of this wonderful institute. Auntie Joy Murphy and all of those here, including Sir Gus and others. We are at a very good point. What has been achieved here is remarkable. Bringing together the various parts, this is about partnership and collaboration. None of this could have been achieved without the support of the Commonwealth, as the Prime Minister has said, over a number of governments, without state government support, without the University of Melbourne's vision, and without Melbourne Health's active involvement. So that partnership, that collaboration is what is at the heart of Victoria's success in these areas. And I think the new Peter Doherty will be another step, another very important step in cementing our position and Australia's position internationally. And to Peter Doherty, it's fantastic to have this institute named after you and the vision behind it. I should tell just one very short anecdote. When I met Peter Doherty out the front a little while ago at an earlier tour of the facility, he pointed out to me that people don't normally have institutes named after them until they're dead. But he is very much alive, and I think it is a testament to the importance of our heritage and the future. So I am very proud to be here as a Victorian, as an Australian, to watch the future of this. I should also note the work done by my secretary, Dr. Pradeep Phillip, and the background work there to make sure that the support was there to get a very good outcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. When I was informed that Professor Sharon Lewin was going to be the inaugural director of the Doherty Institute, I was delighted. I obviously knew of her eminence in research, and I was so pleased that we had managed to search the world and find the right candidate in our own backyard. And then I got to know Sharon much better over the AIDS conference, the largest medical conference ever in Australia. The night that the Premier and Sharon and I turned on the lights on Prince's Bridge to start that conference, it was in the shadow of the terrible events of MH17. And some of the loss on board that aircraft, very close, of course, to Sharon and the other people at AIDS 2014. But even on that night, with the news so raw and so fresh, there was a steely determination about Sharon that would make that conference succeed. despite those terrible events. And she did it in quite remarkable style. It is no wonder she nearly collapsed afterwards, and I'm delighted to see you back on your feet, Sharon. She is indefatigable. She is remarkable. We're delighted to have Professor Sharon Lewin as the inaugural director of the Doherty Institute. Sharon.
Prime Minister, Premier, the Honourable David Davis, the Lord Mayor of Melbourne, Peter Doherty, welcome. Thank you for the very kind introductions. I've now been in the job a total of 8 days, so I'm feeling a bit like a new parent who has adopted a young infant, a child from a clearly pedigree family and with huge potential for a sparkling future, and for whom I have yet to do some real parenting. So like others, I wanted to really start by acknowledging the many people here who have actually done the incredibly hard work. And you've heard earlier, but a really very special thanks goes to Jim Mcklusky, who has incredible multitasking skills and was uniquely responsible for both the conception and to keep the obstetric reference going, the delivery, and to also thank Roy Robbins-Brown, I think, for the naming, and so many of the staff here at absolutely all levels, from the very top to the people that work in this building every day, from both Melbourne University and Royal Melbourne, for their work and care in getting us to where we are now. And I particularly want to thank those who, understanding the need and the vision, have invested to make the Doherty a reality. So today, we do not need to look far to understand why it is that we vitally need a research institute such as the Doherty Institute. And these past few months in particular have driven home to us all that the world is grappling more than ever with infectious diseases. As you heard earlier, as Melbournians, we were all proud to host the 20th International AIDS Conference here just in July. And there we heard time and time again that despite the scientific tools available to us to end the HIV epidemic, infections continue and too many people are denied access to treatment and care. There are 35 million people currently living with HIV, 2.5 million new infections each year, and the global cost of treatment is unlikely to be sustainable. So research towards a vaccine, research towards a cure are both as important as ever. Each year, new strains of influenza develop in the wake of the most up-to-date vaccines, and multi-drug resistant strains of tuberculosis continue to challenge scientists and governments across the world, including in our near neighbouring countries such as PNG. And of course, the current Ebola outbreak sweeping across West Africa constitutes a steep and startling escalation from the smaller eruptions that used to characterise the virus. Our global interconnectedness, a theme explored by former US President Bill Clinton just at the AIDS conference, creates not only major risks, but also major responsibilities for all of us, even those of us tucked away in far-off Australia. And as the UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon observed early last week, the world can no longer afford to shortchange global public health. So we all have a responsibility to respond to the challenge of infectious diseases in the 21st century, nationally, regionally, and globally. And the multidisciplinary focus of the Doherty, as you've just heard, means that we are perfectly placed to do this. The partners who make up the Doherty Institute include laboratories that conduct some of the best fundamental infection and immunity science in the world, and this is where we will develop the next vaccines and treatments that will make a difference. We have public health laboratories that are centres of excellence and reference laboratories that are for our state, country and region, experts in public health and epidemiology, and outstanding clinicians who are highly skilled in treating patients with infectious diseases. Tough problems in science and medicine need large, diverse teams, and this is what we have at the Doherty, a one-stop shop for understanding, managing, preventing and ultimately curing infectious diseases. And importantly, all this sits in an educational setting, a place where young minds are being trained, where we are developing the next generation of researchers, clinicians and teachers to be collaborators and innovators, a place where we attract a very significant number of students from our region who will return to be leaders in their own countries in public health, science and medicine, and so develop more powerful, deeper, long-lasting and mutually beneficial connections between Australia and its neighbours in the region. In his Nobel Prize acceptance speech in 1996, Peter Doherty emphasised the importance of ensuring Australia continues to provide a scientific environment, to use his words, with outspoken and informed local critics, and I suspect Peter might be referring to himself there, the freedom and resources to pursue our own ideas and be given full credit for our efforts. Those of us who have senior roles in science, Peter said, need to do everything possible to ensure that these opportunities and environments remain available to young scientists. As its inaugural director, I am thrilled and honoured to be working for an institute named after such an outstanding role model. Peter reminds us all that we work in science and medicine because we are passionate about it. We want to make things happen. We want to change things for the better by helping to end suffering. And that's what I see as our role and future. Australia has a rich history of collaborative research in public health and infectious diseases. The partnership model of community, government and science adopted here in the mid-80s when HIV and AIDS emerged is still widely considered to be a model to others and is responsible for us having one of the lowest levels of HIV infection in the world. And it is a model that I remain deeply passionate about. So it's my hope that the Doherty Institute not only builds on that proud history of partnerships, leadership and innovation, but at the same time capitalises on its totally unique structure, a structure which will enable us to rapidly deliver what we have been charged to do, to protect Australia and the global community from present and emerging infectious diseases, and together do what its namesake already has done, achieve extraordinary things. Thank you.
How would I describe Peter? He's a terrific mentor.
Absolute passion for science.
He has more curiosity than any person I've ever met.
He's an innovator, he's a teacher.
He's an inspiration for every scientist in this country.
We are proud to have as our masterhead of our institution.
Back in the 1960s, they developed a number of vaccines. Some people were saying the era of infectious disease is over. We seem to have solved a lot of problems. We started to see a lot of antibiotic resistance, we've seen antiviral resistance, and we realise that we're in a constant fight with these organisms that's never going to let up.
HIV, hepatitis, tuberculosis, influenza, drug-resistant organisms, all of those infections still cause significant morbidity and mortality across the world. The Doherty Institute's a joint venture of the University of Melbourne and Melbourne Health.
The general idea behind this institute is to bring together the academic world of infection and immunity with the practical world of people who are actually dealing with these disease processes in the community. What happens in science is if you get together groups, so that they're in the same building and they share the same tea room and they share the same lectures, then you start to get synergies developing.
Because you may have somebody who doesn't know anything about a patient but is doing something that's very fundamentally basic, gets a concept and walks down the hall to someone who is thinking fundamentally about disease in a patient. They talk to each other and the next thing you knew, you have a breakthrough concept.
And it's fantastic for my laboratory because we collaborate with many of the groups that are coming together and have been able to accelerate our research much faster in this brand new exciting institute. HIV/AIDS is on the rise in Australia, and it's still a devastating disease globally. We have several potential vaccines that are being tested in the laboratory. Our vision is that an AIDS vaccine would be incorporated into the usual childhood vaccines ultimately, and the whole world would get protected against HIV and AIDS.
We have a couple of infections around the world at the moment, the MERS virus in the Middle East, Ebola, a horrible hemorrhagic disease, which has not been controlled as well as it should have been. But we're going to have to do our best to keep ahead of the game. Influenza's always there. There's always the possibility of a new influenza pandemic, and they come in totally without any warning.
Often hybrid animal-human influenza viruses to which the global population does not have immunity. And so that virus spreads around the world extremely quickly. We can't predict what they'll look like, but if we had vaccines that were able to recognise the core elements of an influenza virus that are shared between all of them, then we have a chance of really protecting the global population against such a virus.
I think drug-resistant bacteria is one of the most difficult and really quite frightening in some respects.
Superbug, bugs that are almost untreatable with antibiotics. Our first seminar here at the Doherty was of a patient that had developed infection with a virus called cytomegalovirus that had a renal transplant, and this had become resistant to all the drugs that we have. We used T cells, which are part of the body's immune system, from another patient and put them into this patient to actually kill the virus successfully instead of an antimicrobial agent to actually control the infection.
Once that infection is cleared, T cells are capable of remembering that you've had that infection, such that if you get infected a second time, they respond much more quickly and much more rapidly to protect you from any damage that that infection might cause. The real focus or detail of my research is really trying to understand how changes in the genomic structure of the cells is altered as they respond to an infection.
Each year, about 1.7 billion people suffer from bacterial diarrhoea. The bacteria that I work on, pathogenic E. coli, is a significant cause of that diarrhoea. And we work mostly on trying to understand how the bacteria interact with the host and how the host fights bacterial infection in a very specific way.
Here in the Doherty, we have a range of partners who all work towards to see a world that is free of the pain and suffering that tuberculosis causes. We have the statewide reference laboratory for TB, partners who are working with genome sequencing of tuberculosis, epidemiologists and mathematical modelers. We work with vulnerable individuals and communities to prevent getting TB in the future. We provide clinical treatment and public health management to help individual people who have TB to get better.
For hepatitis B in Australia, nearly half of all people living with it, we estimate, haven't even been diagnosed yet. We do translational, epidemiological and public health research, trying to establish the population burden of hepatitis B, but also what evidence there is for the lack of appropriate policy and clinical engagement for people with hepatitis B. And we seek to address that and really have a strong philosophy that epidemiology must direct action as a result to achieve proper public health outcomes.
All of our researchers in the Doherty are top-level investigators who have numerous collaborations across the city, country and world. We're going to really strengthen those on a level of scientific collaboration and most likely internationally.
The Institute is associating research, training, capacity building and also providing services, surveillance of infectious disease and providing services for people that may affect. That reminds me very much one institute that I know quite well, the Pasteur Institute in Paris. I'm sure that it might be a lot of collaboration in the future between the Pasteur Institute and the Doherty Institute.
You usually don't get an institute named after you until you're dead, so it seems to be a bit ahead of the game. I still find it a bit odd, to be quite frank. It's a great honour and distinction, though I've played no particular part in either the design of the institution or the development of it, because I'm now in my 70s and I've always thought that senior scientists should stay out of the way when it comes to the future. One of the key role of the university is obviously to bring on that next generation and those young scientists and make new discoveries. If they want to ask us about what we think or our advice, fine. This is an absolutely unique structure for our country, and in fact, I think for anywhere that I know about.
It was interesting to hear Peter talking about the new generations coming on and how that fitted for me when Sharon described the Doherty as being like a new parent. Sharon, can I tell you, as one of the many godparents paying the school fees, you better make this baby work hard and make us proud. And I'm sure you will. I'm sure you will. Could I invite to the stage to unveil the plaque the Prime Minister, the Premier, Professor Peter Doherty and Professor Sharon Lewin. And if the media want to come down, give them a chance to get there before you knock them down, but by all means, come on down.